Awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Katie. It's such a thrill, such an honor to speak with you guys. I have such an affinity and a heart for Cleveland. The lead single off our previous album, "Speak for Yourself," the title is Cleveland, and I wrote that while lamenting driving 5 hours to Chicago for a gig once upon a time. So I love our city, and it's just such an honor to be a part of this. I was lucky enough to get my APR from Cleveland PRSA back in the Stone Ages of 1999, which is very fun. But it kind of came about where I had always wanted to be a musician, and me and my best friend were kind of dabbling at it ever since we were really pretty young. We were teenagers, and we were working on songs, and we were terrible. I remember we were 13 years old, actually doing a gig, and this was in the early 80s, mid 80s, and heavy metal and hair metal was really popular. And there's nothing weirder than a 13-year-old trying to sing the Scorpions' "Rock You Like a Hurricane." So that was one of my more amusing times in my life. But we started getting a little good at it. We started getting a little better at it. And in 1989, we released a reasonably decent hit single called "Give In to Me" that played around greater Cleveland and Detroit and Toledo and Columbus and into Pittsburgh. So we got some good regional airplay. And there were some record companies at the time that thought we had some potential. So they put us into a real situation and recorded our first big single, which was a song called "Was It You," which was a big 80s soaring hair ballad. You know, if you guys think about like "Heaven" by Warrant or "Every Rose Has a Thorn" or any of those goofy, cheesy, great hair ballads from the 80s. And it kind of launched our career. We shot a cheap video. We actually shot a video in a mall. So we pre-Tiffany'd Tiffany, and that was pretty good. So we started hitting the road, and we would play any place they would let us play, right? We had a handful, I would say 5 or 6 original songs that we had written, and then you'd have to fill it in with cover material. So you'd try to play these clubs. And we all went to college at the time. 2 of us went to Kent State, 1 of us went to BG, and another person wasn't in college. He had a regular job. So we would tour on Fridays and Saturdays. So we would go to class, pack up our stuff in this just absolute piece of you know what van, and schlep it around as far as we could go. We're going to, Cincinnati, and so we had to stay reasonably close because we had to be back for class. But we would tour and we would perform. And because my degree was in journalism, I had this crazy idea of starting to promote the band. I'm like, hey, I know, I can put out some articles and drum up some press for us. So that's really how my foray into public relations began. I was doing PR and event promotions and publicity before I even knew what it was. I didn't really have a good concept or good understanding of PR. So that's why I say everything I learned about PR, I learned in an 80s hair band, because I learned these things while touring. I was putting together press kits of the band. We were doing photo shoots with the band, producing videos with the band, doing publicity stunts. We did an MTV video filming in Cleveland in 1990. And it was just kind of an amazing experience to actually get to do all this stuff before I really had any formal training in PR. So that led me to these kind of 10 things that I thought I would share that kind of has guided me throughout my career and has helped me, stay reasonably relevant as I've gotten a little more gray and a little less hair on top. But I blame that on the Aquanet. So I don't put that all on jeans. So let's take a look at the first one, which is playing with your heart and not just your head. And I think that's important because I think if you go to a concert or you watch a movie or you see a play or you see a PR person and you can tell they're just kind of phoning it in, right? They don't really believe in it. This isn't something they want to do. And there are times that you're doing a song and maybe you don't really like that tune, but you gotta hum along and you look like you're having fun. Because what I've found is if you immerse yourself into what it is that you're putting together and you really love what you do, man, that goes a long way. And I know that every day isn't wine and roses, and every day isn't perfect. But if you have a chance to play with your heart and do what you really love and enjoy, and you can immerse yourself into it, man, that makes a big difference, because that attitude really relays a lot, whether you're at an event or a trade show, or whether you're pitching a story. And we've all had to pitch turds, but whether you're pushing something, I think folks can tell when you're going through the motions. So, try to play with your heart. And when you're crafting good stories, and I think putting together programs, try to share that emotional side and that human element side. All too often, we can get bombarded by statistics, or you'll get a press announcement out that's 4 pages long, and it's got this data and this data and this data. And there's nothing wrong with having data-driven information and data-driven stuff, but to be honest, most target audiences don't want to hear that. They don't want to get their information that way. So the better you can tell that story and create that passion, that's how you're better going to connect with the readers. And I'll use this example. If I shared a song with you that said it's in D minor seventh and the progression is G, F, A, and C, that's not as cool as saying, oh, it's this heartfelt ballad about this man who was so deeply in love with this woman, but he couldn't ever connect with her. It's a totally different experience. So that's kind of my passion there. And what I always say is, don't let perfect get in the way of great. I see so much paralysis with folks just overthinking things. And man, if you get out there and show that passion and show that caring, I think it doesn't always have to be perfect, because folks can see that you really care about what you're doing, and trying to be good. So play with your heart, not just your head. Number two, the show. Oh boy, the show must go on, right? So this just happened. We were doing a show just last weekend. And I don't tour with the band that makes music right now, original stuff. I actually tour with a Bryan Adams tribute band right now. And that's been something we've been doing for a few years. So I tour throughout the region. I don't go all over the country like we used to, but we tour throughout the region and do some big concerts and outdoor shows and whatnot. And sure as hell, second song in, I broke a string. Broke my A string, if anybody knows anything about guitar playing, which is a rather important string to have. But things happen. And I think the key is the show must go on. So what did I do? I turned around. My second guitar was right there. I had it handed to me by the roadie, and I barely missed a beat. In fact, if you turned away, you wouldn't have even known that I switched guitars. So to me, that's important, because if you're pitching stories, if you're doing events, especially if you're having a press conference, no matter how prepared you might be, something inevitably is going to come up. Um, we had an event, there was a storm, and the electricity was out, right? So, oh my gosh, now what are you going to do? I know this never happens to any of you, but occasionally my internet goes down, right? So then what are you going to do? I actually had a staffer, and I won't share who, but she's a little younger, and the internet went down, and she had no idea what what to do that day, because the internet's down. And you get so reliant on some of these things that you got to have a backup, you got to have a plan B, and you got to know what's going on. So we were doing a concert in Mansfield, Ohio, with this big club called, I believe it's called Legends. And we were loud. We were really, really loud. And the club manager came up to us and he's like, guys, you got to turn it down. You got to turn it down. You're just too loud. And, we're 19, 20 years old at the time. So there's no such thing as too loud when it comes to rock and roll. But he was threatening to pull the plug. He's like, I'm going to pull the plug. You guys are going to have to go home. So fine, fine. So me and the guitar player just grabbed our acoustic guitars, sat on a bench, and just started playing all of our songs acoustically. And the crowd loved it. I mean, they went berserk. They're like, wow, this is cool. And it was just the two of us, the drummer and the keyboard player, and the other guitar player thought that was cool because they could just sit down and take a break and still get paid. But the moral is, you got to be strong enough to roll with the punches. Things are going to come up, things are going to happen. And no matter how prepared you are, something's going to happen, and So I think the key there is you want to prepare for things that you may not have thought of, but when something goes wrong, don't panic. Relax. Make sure you've got a good plan B. If you've done an interview with a reporter and it turns hostile, if the reporter doesn't show up and the CEO is breathing down your neck to be doing this interview with the Wall Street Journal, things happen. And I think if you talk to your clients or whomever your reports are and you let them know, hey, this is the reality, I think that's always the best policy. This is what I am expecting to happen. But this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. And folks that aren't in PR sometimes don't understand that maybe you're not going to get the questions in advance, or maybe an interviewer is not going to ask exactly the same questions as you want them to ask. So, be prepared, prepare for the unexpected. Don't panic when things don't go exactly as planned, and roll with it. It's not the end of the world. Number three. Well, of course, as an agency owner, I would strongly suggest all of you to hire outside professionals, right? Um, but this is true in a lot of different regards, whether you're in-house or working with agency, because there's so many specialists and so many professionals out there, especially if you're in a situation where you need to do something that may not be within your bailiwick. You don't always have to be the magic unicorn that knows how to do everything, right? So I'm not a one-man band. I've got a full band of professionals that are fantastic. And to me, that's key. You got to know when to hire the outside professionals. Let them do their job. Let them talk. Let them give you, their best advice and their best programming, and go with that. So I'll use the band analogy. At the time when we were touring, I was still in college. In fact, I think I was a freshman in college, and I was going to school and carrying a normal load. And again, we would pack up on Fridays and Saturdays, play basically as far away from Kent as we could, and then as long as we could drive back. Um, and then during summer break and winter break and spring break, we toured much more extensively. So summer break, we were all over the country, but we had that booked well in advance. We weren't doing the booking. We had booking agents to do all that stuff because there's no way we would have known how to do any of those things. I don't know clubs in Utah, for example. So we had these booking agents that would do this. They take a percentage because they didn't care. They're just throwing us out there. And we would just do this, basically just a big loop. We would go around, and at the end of whatever, we would end up back in Ohio. And I remember the booking guys, because we were dirt poor. We were so broke. The booking guys would actually book hotels purposefully that had like these big concert venues or halls in them, and they would put a rider in there that we would get breakfast and lunch. So at least we knew we could eat. So we consisted on a diet of like hotel food, and like we'd get a hamburger or something thrown in. So we always tried to add that as a rider in there, so we knew that at least we could eat. Because believe it or not, most of these shows, even with production, because we had our own production, some of the places had in-house music, but we had to carry our own sound system and whatnot. We weren't making much more than, you know, 500, 600, $700 a night. So we made more of our money through selling some of the albums and getting some royalties. But the point is, we didn't have the contacts and we didn't have the connections to know how to do all these things at this scale. And even working with other musicians or outside musicians. So I own an agency, but I work with all kinds of other agencies when I need help with something. My firm specializes in national publicity. So that's our main bailiwick. We're doing things with the mainstream media and cable news and the big newspapers, the big magazines. That's our bailiwick. I don't do a lot of local stuff. Actually, I just hired somebody to do a lot of local stuff, but that's a different story. But so we partner with a lot of agencies that help out with certain things. We're in the middle of shooting this kind of epic video. And while I can shoot some basic video, I can't produce Star Wars, right? And we needed to produce something that's really very, very high end. So had to contract with an outside professional. And, so don't be afraid to do that. It's okay if there's a certain area of expertise that you don't have, that you need to hire outside counsel. And I think it's important for your bosses and the other agency leaders, who I think really get that, for them to understand that it's okay for you not to know or be an expert at every single thing when it comes to marketing. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing a lot with resumes or with job postings is that they are looking for this magic unicorn. It's like it's an entry level position, but yet you need to be an expert, with the Adobe suite. You need to be an expert in PR. You need to have national and local media contacts. You need to be perfect in SEO. You need to be a website developer, and you need to know how to do MailChimp. And it's just crazy. So, that's something I think that HR and the leadership team really needs to understand a little bit better. So go ahead and work with those outside pros, and don't be afraid to say that that's really not my gig, because I had to focus on singing and writing songs and and going to college, right? So it's important that you know when to hire these outside pros. Next. So again, this just happened to me last week. You broke a string during a song. You can't stop playing the song, right? So can you? And actually, I've seen big bands do this. I was at an Aerosmith concert, I think back in the '80s, or a Kiss concert, and they flubbed up the song so bad they had to start over. That's crazy. That has actually never happened to me, but I've seen it happen. But if you're able to roll through it, right? There's going to be situations or times. I had somebody. We were up on stage, and I don't know if you've ever sang into a microphone, but imagine you're singing into a microphone, which is basically a piece of cast iron or aluminum, right? And a mic stand, which is also either, cast iron or aluminum or steel or something like that. And somebody had bumped the microphone, and it slammed right into my face, right into my mouth, and it chipped my tooth, bloodied my lip, and the whole 9 yards. So I couldn't stop. I had to keep singing, right? And it wasn't the most pleasant experience I've ever had. It hurt like hell, but the show must go on, as they say, right? So you got to be flexible. You got to keep playing, and you got to have alternatives, right? If things aren't going the way that you want them to, be flexible enough to make those changes. And where that comes into play, I think on the PR side especially, is where, let's say a client, if you're on the agency side or internally, the bosses are kind of coming at you and saying, hey, this is what we're wanting to pitch, this is what we're wanting to pursue, these are the kind of angles. You got to be comfortable enough to say, man, I don't see where that's going. I don't see how that's going to get anywhere. Because the worst thing you want to do is pitch and pitch and pitch and pitch and pitch, and you got nothing to show for it. Not that that's ever happened to any of us, right? But you get in situations where we call it failing quickly at my agency, where if you see that something's really on the fringe, and you don't think that that's quite going to cut mustard, get it out there, but share that feedback. Like, this isn't what I necessarily see as playing, because the media's job isn't always to tell your story, right? Or at a trade show or an event, if people aren't coming and they're not engaging with your brand, you got to be comfortable enough to make those changes. We broke a string, but that doesn't mean we stop playing. That means we've got to pivot. We need to be flexible in our thinking and come up with new alternatives and new pitches and new angles that are going to resonate. So when I'm doing pitching, I always do what I call a pitch matrix. So I'm looking at the media outlet on one side, and I'm looking at the trends and the articles and the things that they're covering. And I'm taking a look at my clients' stories and narratives and what it is that we have to share. And I do my best to match those narratives up with the media outlet. I craft every single one very individually and very specifically. So I'm getting that out to the right outlets with exactly the type of material that they're going to want to have. And if it hits, check. If it doesn't, I move on to the next thing, and I just do it quickly. And that's what you got to do. Roll with the punches, be flexible, but have alternatives. Because what happens to me more often than not, I was pitching a client on Fox News, and it was a big story. It was an important piece, and it fit the kind of narrative, and it fit exactly what it is that they're going to cover, and exactly where they wanted. And they got back to me, but they didn't want that story. They wanted a completely different story with the client. Hey, it was still a big piece. It was still a great opportunity, but it's not like we're only going to do that story and nothing else. So, be flexible and have those alternatives. And I think that's important. It's similar to being on stage. And at the time that we were doing most of our touring, at that point, it was more concert style. And we are doing 10, 15 of only our original songs. So if folks didn't know who we were, they're hearing 10 songs that they'd never heard before, right? So inevitably, you would get somebody in the crowd, and usually these are larger concert venues, and you're getting somebody in the crowd, Skinner, Skinner, they're screaming, play Freebird. And if you saw my band, we're clearly not a Leonard Skinner type of band. I can't even believe that that's not what we look like. We kind of look like a cross between Poison and Cinderella, if you guys are familiar with either one of those bands. So it was an interesting time for fashion in the 80s. And then, when grunge came on, we kind of cut our hair and changed things. But, you got to be flexible. And that was one of the things, too, that we saw when the music industry and the landscape was changing. We definitely had to make those changes and get with the times. So we ditched our Aquanet and tight leather pants for blue jeans and flannel shirts, if you can believe it, which is an odd thing to say. Number 5. Thank you, Katie. So this is a weird one. I have played some of the most frightening venues you could possibly dream of. Like places I would never go into in a million years in my wildest dreams. Like, I can't even believe some of the places we played. We played one place in downtown Detroit, and I felt like we were taking our life into our hands. This place was terrifying. And we're right downtown. It was just a scary place. There were some scary places in Cleveland that we played. We would play some places where we did shows where there was no one in the audience. Absolutely true. And you would play, um, you would get through the show. But, we used to call it's a practice and we get paid if the club owner would pay us. There would be oftentimes if we didn't have a big crowd that the club owner would stiff us and we wouldn't get any money. And that was tough because that's how we put gas in the van to get to the next city. We were living off of, this is crazy to think about. We were living off of, we would buy a bag of potatoes and we would we would go to the store, and if we got particularly fancy, we'd buy some American cheese. And we would take the potatoes, we had a little, cooktop, and we would boil the potatoes and cut them in half and put a piece of American cheese on it, and that was dinner. So, it was an interesting time. But when you're 20, 21, you're resilient, right? You can do anything. You can stay up all night and party every day. But it was amazing the kind of places that we played, but it made us really good, and it made us really hungry, and it made us really want to succeed. So even when we were playing initially in front of nobody or 10 people, in our brain, we were still playing, Richfield Coliseum, right? And to us, that was cool. We were still putting on that good show. Remember playing with your heart? And because if there was one person, maybe it was the bartender, we wanted him or her to walk away and go, wow, you guys put on one hell of a show. And we tried. We would do it because we wanted folks to remember us. And it was funny because what happened is we would put on these shows and inevitably we'd come back to that place, either coming back or maybe the next year. And word would get out and people would come out. And that's how we started building that crowd. And that's how we started building that following. And I think that plays really in PR really well. Locally, we can't all be, who's a really famous, business or company. Say Sherwin-Williams is a huge brand here. We can't all be Sherwin-Williams. We might be a small business. We might be an obscure, kind of organization. And especially if you're trying to pitch at the national level. When I was at agency, I remember there was this client who was absolutely nobody. In fact, it turned out to be a scam, which the agency, it was prior to my firm. I was working at another firm. It was an internet scam company. And this person only wanted USA Today or CNN or MSNBC or CBS. If it wasn't one of those, he wouldn't do an interview. He wouldn't do trade, and he was absolutely nobody. The business was nothing. It wasn't, and there was no story. They wanted the pitch to be about him and about the business. So I had no underground fodder. I had no clips of anything else because he would only do a sit down with CNN or ABC News to the point that I'm like, this is absurd. It's the equivalent of being a garage band one day and headlining at Madison Square Garden tomorrow because that's the only gig that you want to play. And while being aspirational, I think is important, you've got to be realistic. And I have clients come to me almost daily, or potential clients is more like it, who want national publicity. Well, of course they want national publicity. But do they have a story? Do they have any background? Do they have any clips? Are they doing anything novel? So you got to play these kind of places first. You got to hone your craft. You got to get good at what you're doing. You know, the Beatles are a great story with that, when they were the Quarrymen and they were playing in Hamburg, Germany. And they're playing this club and there'd be 5 people there and they're playing their heart out. And then before you know it, there's 50 people there, then 500 people there. And, you know, it's just, you got to start out small. You got to hone your craft because that's what creates that hunger and that's what creates that longevity and that staying power because we were legit. We were good musicians and we were tight and the music was powerful and punchy and I was never embarrassed because we weren't faking it to go up in front of and play in front of any other musician or open for anybody else because we knew we were as good if not better than them. So don't be afraid to not start at the top. It's okay. Get those clippings and get those little wins and those little victories and those will turn into big ones. And if your boss or even you have that ego and you think you're Beyonce, you probably aren't Beyonce yet. So, you know, be honest with yourself. Look in the mirror. Have your boss or the CEO, whatever, have her look in the mirror and say, hey, you know, this is probably not realistic. Let's take a look at what we're doing and what is, and that's just going to save you and the client and or the boss a lot of headaches. So that's a good one. Oh, as all of you who do events are nodding your head right now, right? I I will never. Oh man, we had all the other bands hated us. So because I did what I did and we were getting tons of press. I again, other bands weren't doing it. They weren't sending out press announcements. The big bands were, but like the locals or the regionals or the smaller ones. And we would get tons of press. We would always get these big features in the newspaper. We'd get these big features. You know, we had TV now and again for shows that would come out. They would interview us and not the headliner because they didn't know anything about the headliner. So, you know, we would organize all these press events. We'd have them behind the scenes. We'd talk about the songs. We'd put our press releases out. We'd do these shows. But it happened a lot where we would get like a big feature article in like different cities' version of Scene magazine, especially back when Scene magazine was a really big deal. If any of you guys remember what that used to be like, and it was a huge deal to be in the Scene magazine, which we've been in several times, but that was a big deal. But to get all that press, you know, in these various cities, and you know, again, I'll never forget it. It was the St. Louis Dispatch and they did this huge feature story about us. Like we were like the next up and coming like rock band. And we played this venue. It was probably I'm going to say a 1,500 seat venue. Probably 6 people there. So there we were, you know, playing this huge venue, and we were hoping to, you know, get a good crowd. We had all kinds of publicity, and our song was actually playing on the radio in at the time. And yeah, we had absolutely nobody there. We sat there, we kind of looking out there. Hey, how are you? And we you know, we started playing our songs and made up for it. But you know, we still tried to give them a good customer experience. But you know, you got to understand, and you know, you'll have this with clients. You know, you'll get good publicity, and how come our donations aren't increasing, or how come more people aren't coming out? And you know, you really got to be careful about that because you know there can be situations where you've got operational dissonance where maybe you get some really good press, but your hamburgers are bad or your service is bad. So those things do go hand in hand with the customer service and the experience. Um, you got to understand that just because you're getting an article in the newspaper doesn't necessarily mean that folks are automatically going to open their wallet and start sending you money. That's what fundraising's for, right? That's what capital campaigns are for. So be mindful that there's not always a causality to getting good press that a client or again the CEO may think it should be. You know, getting a nice feature story is all well and good, but that doesn't necessarily mean the floodgates to new business is going to start popping in. Publicity is not a replacement to a business development person or an economic development person. It's awesome. It definitely helps. And you can use it to leverage in in your social media. You can use it in your ads. You know, like you got this great story, and you know, hey, we were as seen on CNN or whatever, and now too with the shrinking landscape of the media and the fewer places there are to put stuff and the fewer reporters that there are to share things, man, it's tough to break through when it comes to just publicity. So while getting those hits are important, I think they're great. Just make sure that you understand the role that publicity is going to be making in bringing folks out to your gig. It's got to be in harmony. It's got to be in conjunction with those fundraising campaigns, with those capital campaigns, with that business development or outside salesperson. So you know, don't think that publicity is necessarily going to bring in a big packed house. Number 7, passion can make up for talent. Oh boy, do I know that. I am not the greatest PR guy in the world. It is a fact. I've not met the greatest PR guy in the world. Um, it, it, whether he or she exists, you know, what's the line? Somebody's always going to be better than you at something. You know, there is not necessarily the best. And where I think I make up for that and where I've always made up for that is I really hustle. I work my tail off. And especially building your own firm. I mean, I built my company from scratch, from literally zero, to one of the largest firms in Ohio now. And you know, it's one of those things where I love what I do. There are days that I don't, but I love what I do. And it's the same thing with music. I love playing music. I would be lost without playing music or writing songs. And I love it to the point that I couldn't even imagine my life without that as a piece of me. And it is that passion, I think, that can make up for maybe a lack of talent. I am not the best guitar player in the world, not even close. You know, whether it's Jimi Hendrix or Eric Clapton or Ace Frehley, whoever your guitar idol is or musician idol, Taylor Swift, I don't know. There's always going to be somebody who subjectively is better or in that given moment is better. But having that passion, that's what's going to fill in that blank. Loving it, enjoying it, man, oh man, I love coming to work. Monday is my favorite day of the week, especially now talking to you guys. But Monday is just my favorite because I get to come in, I get to do stuff, and it's fun. I mean, we have cool jobs. You know, especially with some of the clients that we get to work with. There are certain clients that I would love to have, and I think all of you kind of look at that too. You know, there's certain businesses or types that you like to be, and I think that going towards that is attractive. You know, not that everything is perfect, not that every idea is a winner, but if you've got that passion and you've got that love for it, and I think if you're in this industry, you have to have that passion, right? Because what we do is tough, and I think a lot of people would who are not in our industry really can't grasp what it is that we do because there's a lot of times that we wear so many different hats that we can have a tough gig. I mean, when you're trying to push an article, when you're trying to get that interview, when you're just desperately trying to put, you know, this event together or this campaign, man, that can be a lot of work. You got a lot of moving parts. You've got clients that may not understand what it is that you're doing, or your internal comms teams or internal operational teams just really aren't getting your vision, right? So we got a tough gig. So I think it's important that all of us share that passion and share that passion with each other and build each other up, because I think the only people that really understand what our job is and how tough our job is us. I think I did a video for one of my clients where I played the client as Roto-Rooter. You guys know what Roto-Rooter is, and they're one of our largest clients. And I had written the script for the video, but we didn't have a budget to hire talent, so I played the plumber. And I sent the video to my dad, And my dad was so proud of me that I finally got a real job. He's like, well, that's wonderful. I didn't know you were a plumber. Like, oh my God. But that's absolutely a true story. He was so proud of me. I finally made dad proud because I was a plumber. But it's important that we build each other up. It is a tough gig. Number 8 is practice, right? I think that almost speaks for itself. People are like, how come you're such a good guitar player? You must have just been born with it. Or how come you're such a powerful and good singer? You must have just been born that way. I have been practicing guitar and singing and songwriting since I was 5 years old. Absolute true. My first gig was I sang Delta Dawn at a talent contest in my hometown of Wakeman at the ripe old age of 5. And I think is that Tammy Wynette? I don't even know who sings Delta Dawn. Um, but it was one of those things that I had such a passion for it at a young age. I grew up in a family that played music but didn't have any musical proclivities. But I was a huge fan of the rock band Kiss, if you guys are familiar, the guys with the makeup and stuff. And I loved it. I loved the theatrics. I loved the music. I just thought it was cool. And I wanted to be, Paul Stanley, the guy with the star on his eyes. Like that's what I want to be when I grow up. So at a pretty young age, I'm playing guitar, I'm singing. I would sing along to all their albums. And then at this point, I'm doing like all the school plays and the musicals and getting involved in as much of that as I could. But I mean, I practice guitar almost every single day. And that's not even, with gigs coming up when I'll, double because the Brian Adams band only does maybe about 6 or 7 shows a year. But when we're working on material, man, oh man, and I sing often, often, often. And when we're working on our album, which we're working on our new album right now, it's called Wednesday Nights, and we're hoping it'll be out this year, maybe not, because all of us have normal jobs now. But um, you know, you would be astonished at how much time and effort the band puts into honing and practicing their craft. And to me, I think that's so important in PR. What I tend to see is I don't see the strong writing that I used to see, and I don't know why. Um, some press releases with the ubiquitous quote, which is pointless, or the really lousy headlines or bad leads. They're not written in newspaper style. They're not written in broadcast style. Practice writing a broadcast script. Practice writing a radio script. Practice writing a newspaper piece. So, blasting out these press releases, I've never found, I mean, obviously you're going to get some, but they're not going to be just puked back out by the media outlet. So practice the broadcast script. Practice writing it in a style more akin to that type of newspaper or magazine style, because you'd be shocked at how much more coverage that's going to get you when you practice the different writing styles. Practice putting together these pieces, because we as communicators have to be much more well versed than dipping into the press release, quiver. We need to be able to write a good byline article. We need to be able to write a good op-ed. We should be excellent copywriters. And the best way to do that is absorb the news like it's your job. Flip around to the different stations, look at different newspapers, different magazines, either in your trades or on the national, depending on what you're looking at, and really understand what's making this good, compelling writing that folks want to absorb. Practice that writing. Practice making ad copy or whatever it is that you're wanting to do. But it really does come down to practicing that craft. And the more you do it, man, I promise, the better you're going to get. I think the line is once you've put in 10,000 hours at something, you can then reasonably be considered an expert. So there's no substitute. Practice. I can't tell you how much time I put into songs, and that's why it looks easy when you're up on stage. I'm not looking at my guitar. I'm pointing at girls or whatever, and you're running around on stage. You're not worried about where you're supposed to be because you've practiced it 1,000 times. And the line is amateurs practice until they get it right, professionals practice till they can't get it wrong. And to me, that's key. And that's what separates us from Susie the secretary that's blasting out press releases. So practice. Number nine, what comes after four? Anybody? Anybody? I know we're not in person, so I can't get an answer. What comes after four? Well, in music, one comes after four, right? So the funny line is musicians can only count to four. One, two, three, four, one, two, right? And to me, that's something in marketing that has just stuck with me is that continuous process improvement and getting better. So once you've gone through your campaign and you're evaluating that campaign and you're taking a look at what worked and what didn't, or if you're doing A/B testing on various ad campaigns or social, or you're selling product and you're trying to see which ones, resonating. Again, that kind of goes back to being flexible, but man, you gotta measure the results. You gotta benchmark those results. Client says, I want national press, right? Okay. Or my favorite, I want more awareness. Well, how much awareness do you have now? I don't know. Well, you want more of it though. Yes. So get in first thing. One, measure, set your benchmarks, set those KPIs, those key performance indicators. Understand exactly where you are now. We just completed or just started a big survey for a client because we need to understand all these different facets of areas where they need improvement. And once we understand where these areas are that they're deficient, we then can go in. And it's not just a communications thing, it's an operations thing. So we're not afraid to tell the client that your service sucks or people think you're shady or whatever the reality is. You got to know where you are. So when you get a client or a customer or somebody saying we need to build up our awareness, that's all well and good, but understand where you are. Get those benchmark numbers in. Because if you go to a client or the boss and say, hey, we got 52 likes on our Facebook post. Well, out of context, that doesn't mean anything. Did you get 53 on the last one or did you get 1,000 on the last one, right? So how does that relate? So to me, it's always important that we're putting these results in context. Hey, I got an article on CNN and, I got an article on CNN. It was viewed by X amount of people and our call centers increased by 5% or whatever, right? But put those in context for folks that may not appreciate how difficult it was for you to get that piece and how that made some kind of impact to the core goal of what it is that you're trying to do. Because while we may appreciate as PR guys, hey, you got this nice feature story in USA Today, but how did you leverage that? How did that impact the benchmarks? How did that impact the measurement? How did that, help to sell more widgets? And that's why it's so important for PR to be working across the various disciplines, depending on how big your business is or what role you have, of making sure that you guys are always measuring these pieces and doing it on a continual basis and being able to work together with either your internal teams or your client and saying, here's what we did here, here's what we need to do here. So it's in context and it's giving you some kind of actionable intelligence, as we call it. And finally, number 10. Turn it up. Have fun. For heaven's sakes, life is too short to hate your job or hate your friends or hate your mom or whatever you hate. Right? So, what's the famous line from Poison? In every rose has a thorn. It's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. So soak it all in, right? If this is your first job, it may not be your forever job. Natalie, if you're listening, it should be your forever job. You want to love what you do. And to me, get out there, crank it up, share your successes, share what's fun about what it is that you do and why you're passionate, and don't be afraid to get a no. Don't ever be afraid to get a no. Hey, boss, what if we do X? Now, don't send out a bunch of stupid ideas, right? But, if you're writing a song, and man, you might write a song that's really stupid. One of our new singles is it's a spoof on the old television show Murder, She Wrote, where we took that concept, if you guys know the show Murder, She Wrote, and the song is called Jessica, and we put a twist on it where Jessica is actually a serial killer. So every episode she's going out, and behind the scenes, she's actually the one committing all the murders and crimes and framing these people. It was a really goofy idea, and we threw it out to each other. And the guys loved it. They thought that was funny as hell. And it turned out to be a really good song. So don't be afraid to throw out ideas. In fact, I would say that's our job as the PR folks. Hey, we need to do this. Hey, we need to do that. Because you want to share your story. And if you're not the megaphone for your client or your customer, somebody else will be. So, you got to throw those ideas out there, and don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to, if somebody shoots it down, that's okay. And, like I said, nobody knows everything, and every idea isn't a winner. Every song isn't a hit. But if you love what you do, you get out there, you share what you're doing, share those ideas, man, it's going to be a good day. It's going to be a good week. It's going to be a good month and a good year. And that's what we got. So those are my 10 things that I learned about marketing from being in a rock and roll band. If you guys want to check out our entire catalog of studio songs, there's the link to it. You can listen to them anytime. Several hits on there. The big one is Moonshine. And by big one, big for us, it made the top. It made like the top 100 on the Billboard charts. The big single right now, and I'm happy to share this, and I shared this with Katie and sent her the link. We have the number 34 song in the country on the rock charts right now with a song called The Fall. It's a fabulous rock and roll song. I love that song. And it's kind of deep, a little gothic maybe. And it's called The Fall. I did send Katie the link, but if you Google Turning Force The Fall, you'll probably find it. And we got a new single coming out called Whiskey, and we should have another one coming out probably in a couple months. But that's what we do on the Turning Force side is me and the band, and we work in the studio. We own our own recording studio now, which is really fun because we don't tour, we don't play with the band, we do music. But like I said, I do tour with the Bryan Adams band, and it's so much fun. It's such a wonderful creative outlet. And it's just a joy and a pleasure to do that. And believe it or not, the band is the same guys from the 80s. We've been together, good Lord, we've been together more than 30 years. Isn't that crazy? And we're still best friends. So to me, I think that's kind of cool. So it's a lot of fun. That's my story. Questions, words of wisdom, anything I can share.
Thank you so much, Roger. I know I have a couple that were sent to me kind of behind the scenes, but I would also encourage anyone else, you have a few minutes left, to put those in the chat or come off mute too. So, couple questions. One was,
Yeah.
what advice do you have when maybe for an entry level professional or someone who's having a change of career, but advice on reaching out to those newspapers and those news stations, sometimes maybe for the first time?
Sure. So, if you haven't done it, don't be afraid to do it, right? They're doing their job. You might be today's assignment, you might be next week's assignment. But don't bombard them and don't the worst thing you can do is overwhelm them, right? They're busy, they're underpaid, they don't care about you in most cases. You're today's assignment, you're a job. So be professional, but it doesn't have to be all mushy and soft and whatnot. So if you're pitching locally or pitching nationally, obviously you can use any of the million tools to find media folks, whether Muckrack or Burrell's, or there's a million of them. Or if you don't have that, just go online, go to their website, like wews.com, find the contact person, and find whomever it is that you think makes the most sense for the story that you're sharing. Send them a quick, short email. Hey, Bob, this is Natalie over at the Eisen Agency, and my client is doing this. Thought it might make for a great story. Let me know if you're interested. Just short, sweet, simple, to the point. Give them a day or two because, like I said, they're busy, and unless it's breaking news, they probably don't care. So, and then if you want to follow up, rarely do you need to call them. I don't think that's necessary. An email is usually sufficient. Twitter can also be a great way to reach out to these folks. So if you don't have a Twitter account specific to media relations, you need to have one, and use it specific for media relations. Like that's your reach out. And you can send pitches, you can DM them, you can use that. LinkedIn can also to some degree, but Twitter I've found to be the best. And just keep it simple and casual. It doesn't have to be this long-winded email about, I've got this data and these statistics and this guy did this and da 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 da. Hey, I've got this story, summarize it in a sentence or two, let them get an understanding, and then give them a few days, follow up, and reach out again. So, don't overcomplicate it. Don't overcomplicate it. They're busy. and just find the right person that you need to reach out to. Now, especially the newspapers, and that's almost a malapropism right now, but when you look at the Plain Dealer, the Sun newspapers, Cleveland.com, they're all one entity now, right? So that's just one big glob of freelance people. I think their staff, if you could even call it that, is maybe four people. It's all
Mhm.
freelancers. So it's people that have normal jobs outside of newspaper. Nobody has a beat anymore. They're freelancers. So be mindful of that when you're reaching out to what used to be the Sun newspapers, a lot of the community newspapers. So, get to know them, but understand that the person you're pitching is probably a school teacher by day. So be mindful of that. But don't be afraid to reach out to them. Right? Turn it up. You share the story. What's the worst that can happen? They say no. It's okay.
Thank you. I know something too that is on the minds of a lot of us too, as AI continues to evolve, grow, and kind of shape how we work too.
Yeah.
So that how has AI or other
Hmm.
technologies changed how you and your agencies have worked with the media?
Sure. So believe it or not, and I never thought this would happen, but there are AI programs now that can write your songs for you and record them and play them. Like you can sing like 5 words and it'll have captured your voice, and it'll honestly, there's a thing called Songster. It blew my mind. I tried it and it churned out a pretty good song. I typed in 80s hard rock, a couple of different things, a idea, and 5 minutes later it spit out a 80s hairband ballad. I couldn't believe it. I was flabbergasted. And that's not even the only one. There's other ones out there. So depending on what it is that you're using, Chat GPT, everybody knows of, but Gemini and Copilot and blah blah blah. So what we're using AI usually for is to try to get summary information to establish trends. And that's probably more unique to my agency because we're mostly pitching on a national scale. So I'm looking at things that are impacting folks nationally. We don't touch political nonsense, but it's national consumer or national retail or national franchise and whatnot. So I use AI to try to understand what trends are out there, and I'll try to have it summarize various trends as it relates to a topic that my client is trying to utilize or trying to do. So if I'm able to come back to my client and say, okay, in our industry, these are the 5, 6, 7 things that are hot on their mind, then that's going to allow us to start crafting pitches or crafting operational things that are going to make an impact on that given topic or given entity. We don't use it a lot to write. I kind of frown on that. I think I just don't like it. I'm old school. I would never use AI to write a song or let alone play one. That's horrible. I think auto tune is bad. That's how old school I am. But um, we use it a lot to summarize stuff. Or if there's a byline article that a client needs written that is particularly jargony or trade specific that would be so far out of our bailiwick that it's very difficult for certain people. Let's say your client is a heart surgeon, you probably aren't the best candidate to be writing full-length byline articles about how to perform heart surgery, right? So that may be something that you can use AI for, get that in front of the client to add their flavor to it and make sure that it's accurate, right? But I don't think that we need to be writing about heart surgery. Maybe we do. I don't. We might do it better.
Well, I know we are right at time, but thank you so much, Roger, for joining us today.
Guys, it was sincerely an honor. Thank you so much.
And we will send this recording out and share it. But if anyone has any questions, feel free to follow with Roger.